We're now joined by all of our listeners, and we're really glad that you've joined us. As you know, Dave and I, who we're really privileged to be artistic directors of the Bowdoin International Music Festival, have been organizing a few different sessions in which we connect our Bowdoin Festival community, even in this time when we're forced to be somewhat isolated. And we've taken the opportunity to explore some of the ways in which this Bowdoin Festival has turned into a really incredible network of starting with students. And as you know, in the summer times we have really talented youngsters as young as 14. And now in its 55-year history, the Bowdoin Festival boasts many alumni who have done wonderfully creative things, exactly in line with the mission of our festival, which is through education to be an inspiration and to be one of those institutions that inspires the greatest amount of creativity and highest level achievements from all of us. And what I really love about our panel here, which are three of our alumni composers, and Derek, of course, is not only alumnus but also on the faculty of our summer activities as composer in residence, is that not only are they incredibly creative people and have written amazing music, but if you take the time to look at their websites or explore their output in other ways, you see that they not only are immersed in the most imaginative kind of music making, but also in connecting peoples, connecting cultures, connecting styles, connecting artists, connecting performing groups, even thinking about what it means to connect with society. And issues that our society face, and what it means to be a citizen and a human being and a member of this world, our country and this world. How do you do that as an artist, and especially how do you do that creatively? And I don't think we could find three more brilliant composers who embody that than Derek Bermel, of course, who I mentioned, Vivian Fung, and Viet Cuong. Really, really happy to have them. So I was going to start the conversation, and it can go in many directions. I think we'll have no lack of things to talk about, but I'd like to start with just connecting you back to the Bowdoin Festival. Thank you for your time, and to ask you to tell us when you participated at the Bowdoin Festival, and if you have a memory or a strong impression to share with us from that time. Derek, why don't you go first?
Oh, I see. You're gonna make me go way back there, about 28 years ago. Yes. Well, I, Bowdoin was the first festival that I attended. Actually, I only attended two festivals when I was, a student, and it was an incredible experience for me because it was really the first time I was immersed in that kind of environment, this kind of intense learning environment with so many great musicians. And I think that was the thing that I really connected with the most was how many just extraordinary musicians there were. And so, for example, I remember that I wrote an oboe piece in one day just because I was so excited. A player asked me to do something, and then I just went home and did it, got inspired, and came in the next day with this finished piece for the oboe player. So I think that Bowdoin, um, of course at that time it was a different faculty, although there still are a few people who were on the faculty at that time, which is terrific to have the old timers. But it was certainly just something that as a composer, to be in this environment where really, of course, the center of the festival are the instrumentalists, especially the string playing, and the pianists, the string players, the harpists, the bass players, and then there are wind players too. But for a composer to be in the middle of that just is a learning experience in itself because you're just continually immersed, as everybody is. So it's like being immersed in a language course where you're doing an intensive language course, and that was like an intensive music course. And I just remember that the incredible feeling of connection with all these different people, and also the preciousness of the time up in Maine. And of course, Maine is a singular place to be as well. And I
Yeah.
have, by the way, I have my Bohemian Coffee House cup that I'm using to drink my tea this afternoon in in honor of Brunswick.
Yeah, thanks, Derek. That's fantastic. And I'd like to push back a little bit on your assertion that the instrumentalists are the heart of the festival, because I know, and Dave and I have just wanted to be true to the origins of the festival. It was founded by Lewis Kaplan, but also by the Alien Chamber Players, who were themselves absolutely committed to new music. And commissioning people like George Crumb and David Del Tredici and Bill Bolcom, things like people like that. And so it's always been a central part of everything we do at the Bowden Festival is the vitality of new music. It has to be there, and to have composers there. And for those of you who know the festival well, you know that Derek continues that tradition with events like Guinea Pigs and Bow Ties, where the composers and the performers get together and work on pieces in the course of 36 hours, 48 hours, creating and performing pieces. But it's just, that's just one kind of fun project
I
that
think I
that
was just
utilizes.
reinventing my experience of doing something in one day, maybe. But in fact, guinea pigs and bow ties is it's one of those things that is it's like a yes you can kind of project, and that does really bond the composers with the instrumentalists. And so I didn't mean to imply that the composers aren't important, because of course composers are central and have always been at the Bowden Festival. But I would say that um, that the fact that there are so many great musicians who are just really coming there to perfect their craft, and that composition can kind of come into that and flow in and out of that, is a really beautiful thing, because then you're really seeing the music world for what it is. It's not like composers are sequestered in their own space and that it's all about you, but you're really seeing this kind of dynamic, uh, kind of true to form um, experience, and you're having it along with these other musicians.
Yeah, we love that connection that's possible in a summer festival setting like that. Vivian, would you like to?
Well, I actually have a very similar experience to Derek because Bowdoin was also my first summer music festival. I was, I think, all but 19, very, very green. And it was my first experience, at, quote unquote, summer music camp. And it was a really eye-opening experience, ear-opening experience to be immersed, as Derek says, into the world of really literally living with instrumentalists and communicating with them, and again, composing really quickly. I remember I composed, I think, a woodwind quintet for an arrangement of Happy Birthday or something like that. I don't remember what the context was, but it was fun, and I've never really challenged myself to compose so quickly before. So it, and in really sort of not ideal circumstances, because you're in your room, and there's the bassoonist going off there and the violinist playing there, and you're kind of trying to concentrate here. And so it's actually really good training for being able to create something in those conditions. And it's wonderful because you're surrounded by amazing performers. And of course, also, I also got introduced to some amazing people like Andrei Emelianov, you know, and Lewis Kaplan, of course, and he continued to support me a lot through the years. So I'm grateful for him. And all these other composers that came as guest composers, Elliot Schwartz and Ralph Shapey, he was quite a character. I couldn't forget about him. And Bright Sheng at the time was Bermel, was Derek, and it was like, for me, it was like the first summer experience that really broadened my scope. So I'm thankful for that. Yeah.
Yeah, Thanks, Vivian. Viet?
Yeah, it's crazy that just thinking about it now, I was there like kind of exactly 10 years ago. And Derek was the teacher, still is, as well as Bob Beezer that summer. And just have so many good memories, like just a lot of small things too, like just going to Gelato Fiasco and getting lobster, going to the beach, but also like all the musical things were really great. I think one of my best musical memories there was having a piece of mine on the Gamper Festival. And I also remember Bowdoin really fondly just because like where I was going to school at the time as an undergrad, there weren't as many undergraduate composers there. So I just didn't have very many composer friends when I was in college. And so going to a place like Bowdoin where I could like spend time really closely with a group of composers my age was really great. And just to get to know their music and everything. And I remember I also was working on this piece at the time for wind ensemble. Like I remember like sitting in the library at Bowdoin, like working on this piece, and it was kind of my first piece that really caught on.
That was a great piece.
Oh, thanks. So I remember it fondly because it was like the birthplace of that piece that was like really important for me in terms of my uh, musical growth as well as just my career as well.
Right. Thank you, guys.
Oh, I just suddenly thought of all these things. Like as they were talking, as Vivian and Viet were talking, I suddenly started remembering all these anecdotes. Like Ralph Shapey, when you brought up Ralph Shapey's name, what I remember is him going to conduct, and getting there. He was going to conduct his very very difficult piece, and he stood up to conduct, and there was this sound coming from somewhere that was like a sound of something beating. And everyone was kind of looking around like, where's that sound coming from? Finally, the oboist reached over to him and said, your metronome is going. It's in your pocket. He couldn't hear.
which is
Because his hearing wasn't that good by
that's
that
actually
point.
very funny, Derek, because as way back when we were a younger quartet, we won the Naumburg competition for chamber music, and commissioned Ralph as a part of that award. And so he wrote his string quartet number 8 for us. We went to visit him in his Chicago apartment, and from the time that he met us at the door and brought us upstairs to his apartment, there was this beeping sound. And again, it was the metronome in his pocket. So maybe that's just something he had on his entire life. Part of what made him go.
That's his signature thing or something. Yeah. Yeah, but I got to Bowdoin. I just wanted to say, when I got there and I saw my quartet, I had a pretty difficult quartet. I had a lot of quarter tones in it, and I was very worried about this group playing it, and I ended up with who was in my quartet, Raman Ramakrishnan, who became just a superb cellist who plays all the time, with the Horzowski Trio, but then also with Daedalus Quartet, all kinds of great ensembles with Echo. Shalini Vijayan, who became a terrific violinist on the West Coast, playing in the Pacific Symphony, and I think plays in a quartet now, excellent quartet too. And Vivek Kamath, who's in the New York Philharmonic. So they were all in my quartet, and it was just a stunning group of musicians. It was just incredible, to have those musicians to arrive there and be able to work with musicians on that caliber. Just incredible.
All right, let's bring things to the present day. And Viet, I'm happy to say that Gelato Fiasco figures very prominently in our continuing festival life. So, and Lobster. For each of you, and I know Derek and Vivian, you shared how the Bowdoin Festival was your very first summer music experience, and you were there 10 years ago. If you think back to what you had in mind then, and the goals you had, and how you work creatively, and where you are now, how would you say well, basically talk about where you are now creatively, and maybe include some of the projects that you're involved in now, and reflect a little bit about how you get from there to where you are now. Vivian, maybe I can start with you.
Wow, that's a packed question. Well, I guess the pandemic, I've actually been really busy, really creative, and I can't say it's been easy, but it's been really creative for me because everything for me, all the emotions, just daily events is just intensified. And so somehow it's intensified my experience writing as well. But recently I've begun, I think one of the most important things I've started is an oral history of my family. And that specifically my extended family's journey, they were living in Phnom Penh the year I was born, 1975, and really chronicling their time escaping the Khmer Rouge Cambodian genocide. And I've started to document that as part of my family, history. And I'm currently working on short opera scenes with librettist Royce Vavrick. And what he's done is taken some of the oral history from my cousin and adapted it as a libretto for me to set. So I think that is probably one of the most important things that I can do right now, just to understand how I grew up, but also connect it with my family and the idea of genocide and what's happening also right now in our world. So I know it's a very sombering topic, but I guess, I consider myself a late bloomer because when I was 19, I was so green and, just trying to find out who I was. And I think it took me a while to do that. And I think how things changed for me, the light bulb that went off for me was really when I started traveling, especially to Asia. And I started to really, it really opened my eyes as far as what was possible with music and different kinds of music and different kinds of transmission of music. And a lot of it is not written down, and so I kind of came of age that way. So even though I started composing when I was really young, I consider myself to be a late bloomer. And I think that one thing that is a constant is that sense of wonder. I still have this sense of curiosity and that I really want to write because I need to, and I think that is the one constant that drives me through.
Yeah, I love how your curiosity and imagination comes through in your creative work. I know my group, my string quartet, has been a fan of yours ever since we discovered your first string quartet many years ago.
Writing my fifth quartet later this year.
Oh, that's so great. And I know recently you wrote a string quartet that somehow brought together in your mind insects
Oh
that you
yeah.
heard in Cambodia, along with your family history and the genocide, and I mean, and then trying to apply that imagination to the instruments of the string quartet. It's awesome. It's really great. Viet, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking back to when I was like writing the music I was back then, 10 years ago. And I don't know, it's felt like such a steady, gradual thing, like for the last 10 years in terms of getting better as a composer and making new relationships with other musicians and everything. So it's like hard to like kind of even say how things have changed because it's been so gradual. And but I think like if 20-year-old Viet could hear what like 30-year-old Viet is writing now, I think he'd be really like happy that I kind of have found a place now where I'm writing. I just feel very honest and I don't feel like I'm trying to like impress anyone or anything. I'm just like writing what I want to hear and what I think will connect with people. And over the past 10 years, I've kind of just tried to write everything. Like I want to write for orchestra, I want to write chamber music, I want to write for voice, I want to write for wind ensemble and all sorts of things. And recently I've been trying to find projects where I can actually like bring all those things together. Like the big project I've been working on for a while now, and I'm finishing up is this concerto for eighth blackbird with wind ensemble, and to like be able to bring like these two worlds that mean a lot to me and have played a big role in my just like life as a musician, get to like bring them together in a way like that with the pieces just really just feels really like a big moment for me. And I think a 20-year-old Viet would be like really excited about it.
One of the things that I really enjoy when I look over some of your creative output is that you'll write for anything, and you'll somehow figure out how to take your musical vision and translate it for almost any instrument. Has there ever been a time, or do you imagine a time in your life where someone says to you, "I really want a bagpipe concerto," and you'd be like, I'm not, I'm not the guy for that.
No, honestly, I'd love to write a bagpipe concerto. They're like, I feel like what I want to write is like often has like one of my dream projects is like harpsichord concerto. Like, I don't know if he's gonna ask me to do that, but I don't know. I like kind of for me, like sometimes the more like strange it is, the more I'm like drawn to it. Like I wrote like a year and a half ago this like double oboe concerto that was just like this really great conductorless chamber orchestra in LA, the Kaleidoscope Chamber Orchestra. They're so flexible with their instrumentation. They're like, well, Viet, like, what do you want to do? And I was like, give me a week and I'll think of something. And I came back to them with like, I want to write a concerto for like 2 oboes, just like they did in the Baroque era. And I want to like have harpsichord. And they were like, okay, cool. And I feel like when I get to like kind of find ways to make these strange combinations still sound like me, those are like my stronger pieces.
Yeah, reminds me of an oboe joke, one of the few, which could very easily be a viola joke. In fact, maybe it's just a revenge viola joke. But you know, how do you get 2 oboes to play in tune? You kill one.
Yeah. Well, luckily in this piece, I don't have to play into each other. The piece is about like basically one of the oboists is like a rebel and plays multiphonics, like multiphonic-ified versions of everything the other oboist is playing.
That's great. Derek, I know you've spent part of your creative life traveling and learning to write for an incredible number of instruments. So I know that's been part of your artistic journey. Do you want to add some thoughts about Derek of Bowdoin Festival, your first music festival, to where you are now, and some of the things that got you to where you are now? And
Well, like I said, that was 28 years ago. So now when I think about that, whew, that's like, it's almost a lifetime ago. It's definitely a couple of generations ago. But first of all, I want to say I love that piece of Viet's, the double oboe concerto. It's really funny. Also, it has like, one thing you have Viet that's so wonderful is a great sense of timing, and so it's so much fun to watch that continue to grow as your music is going in all kinds of directions, and but still very experimental, and just also, I mean, I'm a big fan of both these composers' music, also Vivian's music, you know, just such a great orchestrator, and so you know, it's really terrific to just kind of be thinking about all the great things that you're doing, because I've heard both of your music over the years, and I think that's the exciting thing to me about Bowdoin is that you know, when I got there, I had this bunch of composers who were there with me, and that was really this kind of bonding experience over 6 weeks, and that's something very special that composers get to experience there, because you're in this group of creatives. You might not all even really get along or even have the same kinds of ideas, but you're learning from each other every day and hanging out a lot. And so I, you know, there's some of them that I'm still in touch with, like Melissa Hui and Dan Becker, who was there, you know, at the same time. And I learned a lot from them. You know, I learned a lot about, at that time, it was before I had been studying in Europe. And so I really learned a lot about a lot of trends. And in fact, I first heard Louis Andriesen's music, and then later I went to study with Louis. So it was a real learning experience. I first heard his music at Bowdoin. Dan Becker played it for me. So that kind of sense of community was really important. And I think that has resonated a lot through my life, whether it's been communities in other places and trying to incorporate people from whose traditions are outside of the classical music tradition, into my work and work with them, even though that poses all kinds of challenges, as both these composers here today and you guys also know. It's a challenge to work with people who are not coming from the same kind of musical tradition, but I always find it really invigorating, and it changes my music, and I learn from it. So I think that sense of community that we had at Bowdoin, I think, is something that I always like to bring into projects that I'm doing. And it's funny because I guess I never really became a teacher in the way that, I don't have an academic job, which is, well, I guess not, not tends not to be the path once you've gone through conservatory kind of music programs in universities also. But I still, I think I found the that excitement of people being so engaged with new music at Bowdoin. Everyone from Louis Kaplan and the Aeolian chamber players to working with Lisa Kozenko and all the great string players like Steve Doan, who's still teaching, and Peter Basquin, who was there, who's still on the faculty. So those kinds of things really, that kind of mentorship really impressed me, and I guess that became something that through my role at American Composers Orchestra, I've tried to continue with composers is the kind of mentoring role and just and providing kind of professional support for the projects that they do, because I found that was so inspiring to me at Bowdoin.
I have another topic to go to, and Dave, I also wonder if you have anything to add. It's really interesting to be in the arts world because, especially in music, because as you know, as everyone knows, there is a strong and long tradition of saying music is just about music. It's music. And there's, I would say, an equally strong urge now as a human being, as an artist, to say, well, but what do we do about issues like social justice and climate change and all the other things that also are about being a human being, and about connecting and relating to one another. And I know that the three of you are not, it doesn't seem to me to be in the camp of saying, no, music is just music. Don't bother me with, with societal issues and cultural forces, that you're willing to take them on and to say something about it as an artist. I wonder if any of you would jump in and give some thoughts about that. I know, for example, Vivian, you've even taken on writing a piece about climate change up at Banff. So what are your thoughts about being a composer and being willing to take on connecting your music to climate change, to things like that?
You've done your homework. My goodness, I'm so impressed. Yeah, the piece that you're referring to is called "The Ice is Talking," and it's it's scored for 3 ice blocks and prepared electronics. And it was inspired by my trip to Banff, Canada. And I grew up in Alberta. I grew up born and raised in Edmonton, and Banff would be my childhood summer vacation, so I always have fond memories of Banff, and we would always go to the Columbia ice fields and, drink the wonderful glacial sweet water and, get on and take pictures and, and then go to Banff and do some hiking and go into the Sulphur Springs and then go home. So that was like a typical summer sort of vacation, 2-3 day vacation for our family. So I got a call from Steve Schick, who was then the music director, summer music director at Banff back in 2016 maybe. And they started brainstorming about ideas of what to do. And he wanted to connect me with this amazing percussionist by the name of Ayun Huang, who's really great. She teaches at the University of Toronto, and she's really an extraordinary percussionist. And so I got the idea of doing a workshop first, because percussion can be anything, right? It can be anything that you want it to be. And at first I thought about water as an element to explore, but then I saw the glaciers that I grew up with receding almost like half of what I grew up with. So the effect of the climate change really was pronounced, and I decided to write a piece about it. So the ice is talking is really an emotional reaction to that. So that's a long anecdote, but I guess to answer your question, I think, you know, it's really important, as far as I'm concerned, is to for composers to, you know, for me, I see myself first and foremost as a humanist, you know, not only as a musician, that, you know, you comment on the world through music, you know, you live today and comment through your music. And so I feel like you kind of have to live your life to the fullest extent in order to really become a great composer. So I feel that's really important, actually. And including, you know, family life, including for me, was a major decision to have a child. And when I did, I think actually my music became better.
Viet or Derek, do you have some thoughts to share about being an artist and writing pure music, abstract music? And how you I mean, it's still, music is just about music. I really believe that, but on the other hand, now context has become a pretty important factor in music.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that, you know, like whether or not you want your music just to be music or you have some sort of programmatic goal in mind, it's still going to make someone feel something. Like it's going to get some reaction out of someone, even if it's just pure music or something. So to kind of, you can like lean into that. And if you're trying to express something, how you feel about something happening in the world, or you're trying to start a conversation about an issue, music oftentimes, in the way that it is abstract, and if you don't have like a text or something, you don't have to say something specific necessarily, but you can start a conversation or at least get people thinking about things. Like I wrote this piece a couple of years ago that's like about renewable energy, and it's this big like percussion quartet concerto that's like meant to celebrate renewable energy. It's because it's something I believe in. I think it's like the way to go. And I remember like I wanted to write a piece that really felt like it was celebrating it. And so the way I was approaching it was like, well, like how musically do you get people to think about this in a positive light, and in a way that maybe if they didn't think about renewable energy ever before going to that concert, they'll leave thinking about it, at least in the very least. And I think it's like kind of our role as artists to reflect what's going on in the world. Like, you know, in 100 years, when they look at what people are writing, like there will be some pieces that are very of their time. And I don't think that's a bad thing.
Yeah, you know, just to pick up on something that you were just saying, Viet, I think that it's, you know, as an artist, and this is something I appreciate about both of your work, because I think that it's very hard. You can't actually, on that kind of line between art and propaganda, you know, you can't really, if you go too far along that line, then you get some diminishing returns from the audience in terms of if they feel lectured to, they can kind of tune out because they start to feel that it's not their own experience. And art, if anything, should be for the experience of the listeners or the viewers. So ultimately, that connection has to come to them through work that they do on their own by listening. Because if they're not really listening, but they're just taking something in and kind of then they're taking your thing. But the real transformation in art comes when a listener has their own experience with the art, which is going to be different actually than the experience that we give to them or we offer them. or that we may think we're offering them. And I think that that's true in the way that we communicate through you, like you guys who are just, consummate performers. You get what we give, and then you in turn give it to the audience, and then they have their own experience. And on each of those levels, it's transformed the experience. So I think that's the magical thing about art. And then it comes back to us through the experience of the audience, which is something really, really magical. Like I'm sure we've all had that where, an audience member comes and says, this is the experience I had with your piece. And it may be completely different than what I would have imagined. So, something that's been really important to me over the years is, I don't even know this except that when I look back on some of my work over the past, 25 years or so, and I realized that I was trying to tell a lot of American stories that were not ones that I had learned in school or hadn't really been talked about. And I just realized that through looking back on projects like working with the Migration series of Jacob Lawrence, or taking all this time to tell something I did once for the Pittsburgh Symphony with choir, which was a story about the kind of these cities in the Midwest growing and the tensions that took place in America. This large project I did with the rapper Mos Def about some of concerns that he had, and so now I'm working on an opera with Sandra Cisneros, the writer, and it's based on her story, The House on Mongo Street. And again, it's just kind of I think of it as almost like a modern classic, but again, it's not the story that you would hear. It's not a typical kind of American story that you would learn about in school, but it's very individual. So I think that that's something that really excited me, but I'm not sure I would have known that until I looked back on my work and I realized, wow, I've really been concentrating over and over on this kind of unheard story, which was kind of interesting to sit and think about, but I'm not sure I know why,
Thanks, Derek. Let me remind our listeners that we will have a time for questions in just a few minutes. And if you'd like to submit a question, you can look on the bottom. It should be on the bottom of your Zoom program, and it says Q&A. I actually already see one person has submitted a Q&A. So please go ahead and do that if you have a question for our wonderful guests. Dave, do you have something to?
Well, I'll just ask a quick question to take us to the other questions that'll end our hour. So just before we got online, I was hearing a little bit from you guys about, the challenges of the last year. And, well, it's been true for all of us, right? But Vivian mentioned that she was frustrated. She couldn't hear in person a performance of a piece that she had just written. So, what you're saying, Derek, about closing the circle and hearing your piece through the audience's ears, that's not possible in some ways now. And Derek, you mentioned being challenged by Actually, so I mentioned to Derek that my daughter, her youth orchestra is playing a piece by Derek, but it's, I think, a big experiment for Derek, writing for something that kids could play, but like they're apart from me, Dory, who's playing the solo violin part, and Derek's not here either. And so I don't know, there's been a lot of challenges, and I admire how creative you all have been in keeping true to your creative selves during this last year. But so my question is, what are you looking forward to the most when this is done? Because let's hope we are getting close to the end of it. So musically or otherwise, anything you're looking forward to when this is all hopefully done soon?
Giving my performers a hug. Being able to touch people and collaborate, and do things. I mean, collaboration, I think, is so important for composers. I feel like, I can't really compose in a vacuum anymore. I really have to have someone in mind when I write a piece of music. And performers are so important in our world, and I miss them.
Yeah. Derek or Viet, anything you guys are looking forward to about that? I mean, I'm sure many things, but anything specific you want to mention?
I mean, I agree with Vivian. I think we're all kind of, deprived of being in the same room with people and people that we love, people that we care about, just being very fragmented. And the music community, you know, we rely so much on that as performers and as composers to be with each other. You know, this project, Dave, that you mentioned with Midori is interesting because, you know, one of the things Midori said to me when she called is she said, you know, I really feel that this is a very bad period for kids who want to be learning music. And I don't know, you know, with your kids, you know, they're at that age where they're together in groups, they're making music, they're playing with friends, they're doing sports, they're having all kinds of fun. All of a sudden, you know, that's gone. And and so she felt that what she wanted to do in this project was to work on a concerto that would allow them to practice the kinds of things that they would be doing if they were together. So that meant that we had to deal with all these issues like latency, with if they were, if you know, it couldn't be done in the on Zoom because of the latency. So we're using these more advanced technologies to try to overcome that. But she wanted them to be able to tune. She wanted them to practice playing together, listening, and those are the kinds of things that, you know, that are really a challenge with anything that's remote, because normally people are using click tracks. They're engaging with music in a way that's really very different, in the same way, more like the way recorded music is dealt with, where you're sending files back and forth and editing and playing to a click track. And she wanted to try to not do that. So that's what we talked about, and that was my challenge in writing the piece, that I felt like I had to write a piece, and that's why it ended up being kind of these long cadenzas for Midori, connected by this looser music that the kids would be playing, so that they could do that, but would have her in a way as an anchor. But it's tricky, and I am so much looking forward to getting together with people and just enjoying playing music together and talking and being together.
Viet, anything you're looking forward to specifically?
I mean, I agree with all of that. I think, you know, like after all of this, I'm really optimistic that there's just be kind of this like renaissance of collaboration, and just all of us have this like pent up, like, you know, to get out and be together again and make music. And I'm looking forward to like going to things like concerts and rehearsals and all of that, where no one's going to be taking it for granted anymore. Because I think there's like, I think back to before the pandemic, and you know, like meeting all sorts of musicians who like are just kind of in the doing the grind, and you know, whether or not they were taking it for granted, it's like you start to not appreciate the really small things, like being able to play like a duo with someone. And so like to actually, when we're through this, to be able to play a duo with someone, it's going to feel like triumphant, something as small as that.
Yeah, Dave and I reflected on in March, when everything kind of paused extremely, that we stopped playing string quartets together, and it took us 3.5 months before we felt like the conditions were okay for us to get back together again, distanced. And it was a somewhat emotional moment to actually be musically present with each other. So I hear you. We do have a question that was posed by someone who sounds like they've been a real fan of the festival and involved in the festival. And this is a question for Vivian. And the question is, what have you, or have you written anything recently that is as freeform and fun as a percussion piece that you created with Luke and others in 2014? And the question thinks, the person who wrote this question thinks it might have been called Voices Inside My Head. And secondarily, do you have a favorite bubble gum? So that must relate to that same experience. Vivian, what do you, does that ring a bell? I hope.
Well, Jack is referring to a piece commissioned by Bowden for their 50th anniversary, and it was, I got a call from Lewis Kaplan, and he said, "What do you want to write?" And so I said, "I wanted to write a percussion piece." And so Luke Rinderknecht, he's still there, right? He's fabulous. And so I wrote a piece for him and his two students who were there at the time. And it's really wacky. There's a section where they get pieces of a newspaper and they start ripping it. And so at the end, the whole stage looks like a hamster cage, It's a lot of fun. To answer Jack's question, though, yes, I've written actually a piece called Earworms for orchestra, in which at the time of composing the piece, my son was maybe 3 or 4. And that song, Wheels on the Bus, the wheels on the bus go around and around. Well, he would incessantly want that piece played everywhere, like in the car, at home, going to bed. And, became such an annoying earworm to me that I decided to use that as an inspiration for a piece. So I called it Earworms. And the piece is that plus 4 other earworms that were swirling inside my head at the time. And some of them you can probably recognize. There's a pop tune in there. There's a La Valse is in there. The Unanswered Question is in there. And it's like all a combination of what was going inside my head at the time. You can check that out.
And do you have a favorite bubble gum? Is part of that question too.
Oh, well, see, the dent in the bubble gum came when I had to start wearing braces 2-3 years ago. And at that time, my favorite bubble gum was the bubble gum that would blow the most bubbles, the really pink, really massive wads of bubble gum. And I would blow these humongous bubble gum, pop them. And at the end of the day, if I was really productive, I would have bubblegum wrappers everywhere, because I would just take a piece of bubblegum and chew it. And, that would be my process. I had to chew everything. And now that I have had braces, it's become a little bit, muted because of that. But probably will return at some point.
Yeah, the idea, Vivian, what you're talking about is the creative process. I think that's fascinating. It's fascinating to me. It's fascinating to everyone, especially as a composer, where the inspiration comes as a melody, a fragment of a melody, a sound, a rhythm. But before we could go there, there is another question, and that is to both Vivian and Viet. And the question is, could you recommend a piece of yours that someone who is not familiar with your music could listen to first? Someone who says, "I want to get to know your music." Is there a piece that you'd recommend where they start? It's probably a tough question, but whatever comes to mind.
Yeah, I'll say my double oboe concerto. There's a performance on YouTube. Maybe I'll find it really quick and just link it in the chat. But it's called Extraordinarily Fancy. And I think in the Q&A you mentioned that you don't that you don't know much, or that you're not very familiar with modern music. It's a piece that's inspired by Baroque music. So I think it'll be, it starts with like the first 2 minutes of me trying to sound like a Baroque composer. So it's a good starting off point, I think. I just put it in the chat.
Okay, so maybe I should start with my most recent ones. I wrote a piece called Prayer, and it might be resonate with a lot of people. I wrote this piece right when the pandemic shutdown occurred, and it was written. I wrote it in a week because of the conditions of the commission. It was commissioned by the CBC, and it was going to be conducted from Yannick Zagan's living room. So he was going to be conducting, and then they recorded 26 musicians from across Canada, each in their houses, and put it all together in a video and audio. So I created this piece for that sort of occasion, and it was broadcast on Canada Day, and so I can share the video online as well. And I guess I also have a second piece called Underwandering Souls, and it's relating to what I was talking about, my exploration into my family history, so I can also link that.
That's great. Another question, and I'll just read it directly. Could you talk a little bit more about your process for collaborating with performers? And I know you've all mentioned that, and Derek in particular, you were talking about when you write a piece, you have an idea in your head, and then it goes to a performer who has to, and Dave and I certainly, are on this side of things. You come at notation, and you work with it, and you live with it, and you try to get underneath it and through it. Fortunately, when you work with a living composer, you can always pick up the phone or get on Zoom with them and say, what the heck is this? But anyway, there is that process, and then it comes to an audience and it comes back to you. But this question is, could you talk about that process for collaborating with performers? Any of the three of you?
I'd say for me, collaborating is really important when I'm writing for instruments that I don't play myself. Just because, I recently wrote like a saxophone and piano piece, and I was like very idealistic, like maybe they can do this, and they couldn't. So just being like open-minded and writing stuff and sending it back and forth. And I also play percussion, but when I write for percussion, a lot of the time I don't write for conventional instruments. So last year I wrote a piece that was premiered like the week before a lot of the shutdowns for COVID. That was for Sandbox Percussion, and it's for a wooden box that they use sandpaper on. It's called Sandbox. And I'd never played a wooden box with sandpaper. So it involved me like making a box myself and trying stuff, but then also sending it to them, and they would send me videos, and just a lot of back and forth. And thankfully today with the internet, it's easy to do that sort of thing and collaborate with people who you don't live nearby.
Yeah, Viet, I also saw that you wrote a piece for a percussion quartet, So Percussion, with 15 wine glasses, and just wondering if there's a lot of also wine consumed in the process there.
No, I won't confirm or deny, but it's when I approach collaboration, I also just like enjoy being friends and with the performers, and just like the musical stuff is also just part of our hanging out with each other. And I think a lot of my most collaborative and best pieces born out of collaboration are with people I'm close friends with.
Well, I have a story about the process. Right now I'm creating a piece, and I was talking about it, centered around the oral history of my family. And so I need to, when it comes to voice, I think you really need to know what kind of voice you're writing for to really, and really, I really would be great to work with that person to know, okay, is this note comfortable where it sits on your voice and all that. But in addition, also the timbre of the voice is very important. Work, knowing how to write for that particular timbre of voice. And then I'm writing for her plus percussion, but the caveat is that they're in Toronto and they need to be filmed in Edmonton, in Canada. And so the percussionist, we have to figure out a way to either have the percussion instruments available in Edmonton, or bring a suitcase filled with that, so that we can travel with it and not be so heavy, or have it be so homemade so that you can get it from your kitchen. So all these things in a pandemic you have to think about as far as logistics. So actually that makes things a lot more creative, because you have to think about, okay, not only what kind of sound do you want, but how well will it travel? And so there's an added layer of the process when it comes to that. And it actually makes for an interesting challenge. It's sort of like, you know, doing the Sudoku puzzle. You know, it's not only creative, but it's also all these other things that you have to think about. So that is part of the process under pandemic conditions.
Derek, do you have thoughts to share about collaborating with performers? Well, and you've kept up your performing chops too, all along, and you do a lot as a clarinetist, horn player. So
Yeah, well, you know, it's funny. You start off learning from your teachers, your composition teachers, but really your teachers along the years become your collaborators, the performers with whom you work. And that I'm sure goes for you guys too. That I mean, I assume, you know, you learn from the people with whom you collaborate. So that could be composers, but also other performers. And so I really feel like all the performers with whom I've worked over the years have become my teachers, really, my colleagues, you know, and then also your students become your teachers. Like I'm sure I copped a couple of things from Viet along the way, because he's so creative, you know, over the years. So it was, that, but I would say, you know, it's interesting. My first quartet that I really wrote for an existing quartet was for the Guarnere Quartet. I was thrown right into the ring there, and so I wrote a very specific kind of piece for them. And then and I had another idea, but then I decided no, I'm not going to do that because I don't think these guys will want to play this this idea with all these quarter tones. And then after that, I went to write for the Jack Quartet. I had a commission from the Jack Quartet, so who were, of course, mentees of the Yings. And so so that was a totally different generation. I skipped my whole generation and went to the next generation, and I wrote for them. And then I wrote a very different type of piece. And now I'm excited to write for the Ying Quartet, which is going to be my next quartet, and that's really exciting. And so that'll be a whole other kind of collaboration because we played together, you know, some, and I've known you guys, I feel like we're friends and we're colleagues. And so that'll be like my generation, you know, kind of writing for a quartet for my own generation. So that'll be even something just as special in a different way. So I think you get something out of every different group with whom you work. Oh, and I saw that Jack just asked about Most Deaf.
Yeah. Yeah, so maybe we'll maybe that'll be our last question talking about crazy collaborations. But yeah, what about that?
Well, speaking of collaborating, so most definitely, I mean, just for those of you who don't know, this is Yassine Bey, who's a rapper from Brooklyn, who used to be known as Most Def, who's also an actor. And I did do a project with the Brooklyn Philharmonic around the time, I think, that I started coming, maybe a little before I came to Bowdoin. But the idea was, well, it was suggested to me by a friend who's a conductor named Alan Pearson, who conducts a group called Alarm Will Sound. And he had just been appointed at the Brooklyn Philharmonic and said, if you could work with any rapper from Brooklyn, who would you work with? And I thought about a couple people, but I said, well, hands down, it would be Mos Def because I just think he's really innovative and interesting. And, you know, just I think this is a person who's interested in all different types of music. So we actually proposed a number of things to him. And one of them was actually that of course, I arranged a bunch of his stuff, and he rapped over one of my pieces, a piece I had written for Wynton Marsalis. He rapped over, I did arrangements of Tony Williams, Frank Zappa, Waka Flocka Flame from Atlanta. But also, he rapped over Beethoven's Seventh Symphony. And that was interesting. We were trying to work with the Funeral March, and he couldn't really get into it. He said, he was telling me, you know, that he was having problems just approaching the music. And so at that time, I was trying to think of something he might relate to, because he really relates to songs and kind of stories of struggle, because he had a lot of struggles when he was growing up. And so I sent him the Heiligenstadt Testament because I thought he would really relate to Beethoven's struggle with losing his hearing. And he read that, and that was like the key. That was the way into Beethoven's music for him, was hearing about that struggle and looking at the manuscript. And I sent him a translation. And, you know, he said, boy, learning about that, it made me feel so close to him. And I said to him, well, you know, Beethoven was also Most Deaf. And he was like, oh. But anyway. It just shows that, but to do a collaboration like that, I think you have to be, it doesn't happen overnight and it doesn't happen easily. And one has to take a step forward. I mean, both folks have to take a step forward toward that so that it's not just saying, well, he needs to come into the classical music world and do this, or I need to go there. But it's really a coming together. And that's the difficult thing about collaboration. It's not easy. Working with other people and real things that are learned are usually learned through struggle. So in that way, I appreciate that.
Wow. Thanks, Derek. And thank you, Vivian and Viet. I'm really excited because I think, Viet, what you said is really true. I hope, I sense that as this pandemic eases, that there's going to be an explosion of creativity, of coming back together again. And I know you guys will be a big part of that. I see that you shared several links in the chat, so invite all our attendees to check out both Vivian and Viet's music if you don't know it. And I bet there's a way to even get in contact with them through your websites or to send you guys a note. So if you start exploring their music and you want to send some messages to them, please do. There's nothing more exciting than exploring new music and just exercising our imaginations. It's what we want to do at the Bowdoin Festival. So thanks to everyone for joining us. Thanks to Derek. Thanks to Vivian. Thanks to Viet. Thanks to Grace Bell, who is behind the scenes helping all this to happen. And we look forward to seeing you all again very soon. So thank you.
Thanks, Dave, and thanks, Phil.
Thank you.